In the previous video, we talked about this line that art never improves, but the material of the art is never quite the same. And I gave you the example of violin poets. And today, if one were to write poetry, one often writes about WhatsApp and other technological things. In the future, the same kind of romantic poetry or poetry about the beloved can be talked in the forms of these avatars or the projection, holographic projections, etc. So the material of the art will change then also. This is what Eliot implies by this line. Next, he writes, he must be aware that the mind of Europe, the mind of his own country, a mind which he learns in time to be much more important than his own private mind, is a mind which changes. And that this change is a development which abandons nothing en route, which does not superannuate either Shakespeare or Homer or the rock drawings of Magdalene draftsmen. So he says he's talking about the historical sense, the comprehensive wholeness. And as you know, English literature is based mostly, English literature has its base or it continues from the ancient Greco Roman traditions. So that is the tradition according to Eliot. And he says that the mind of the Europe or the mind of the country in which the writer is writing, in which he learns in time to be much more important than his own private mind, is a mind which changes. So the historical line or the historical sense is not something which remains the same. It changes with time. For example, even if you look at the Indian tradition, what Indian tradition, Indian poetry in various languages was in the 1600s is not the same as it is was not the same as it is today, because the mind of the country has changed. The mind of the country, meaning thereby the collective consciousness of the people, it is what changes. Next, he writes that this development, refinement perhaps, complication certainly, is not from the point of view of the artist any improvement, perhaps not even an improvement from the points of view of the psychologist, or not to the extent which we imagine, perhaps only in the end based upon a complication which complication in economics and machinery. So same thing as the previous line or the line preceding that, that material of the art improves. But here he says that an artist might feel that only economics and machinery have become further or more complicated. But he says, but the difference between the present and the past is that the conscious present is an awareness of the past in a way and to an extent which the past's awareness of itself cannot show. So the difference between the past and the present is that the conscious present is an awareness of the past in a way and to an extent which the past awareness of itself cannot show. Past was not aware of itself in the same way as we are aware of it. For example, when perhaps Mahatma Gandhi was fighting for our independence, or the people at that time, they did not have, or he himself did not have so much of reverence and awe for him as we have of him today. And Albert Einstein rightly said that coming generations would not believe that there was such a man that walked in flesh and blood. So again, the past is not so much of aware of itself as we are aware of it at the moment. Next para, someone said the dead writers are remote from us because we know so much more than they did. Precisely, and they are that which we know. I'm alive to a usual objection to what is clearly part of my program for the métier of poetry. The objection is that doctrine requires a ridiculous amount of erudition. Erudition means learning, pedantry, a claim which can be rejected by appeal to the lives of poets in any pantheon. It will even be affirmed that much learning deadens or perverts poetic sensibility. So if you are very learned, if you learn a lot, and this is a common criticism that it has made your poetry very academic, or it has perverted it or deadened it. While, however, we persist in believing that a poet ought to know as much as will not encroach upon his necessary receptivity and necessary laziness, it is not desirable to confine knowledge to whatever can be put into a useful shape for examination, drawing rooms, or the still more pretentious modes of publicity. Some can absorb knowledge, the more tardy must sweat for it. Shakespeare acquired more essential history from Plutarch than most men could from the whole British Museum. So Shakespeare loosely based his historical knowledge on two texts. One was Plutarch's Lives of Ancient Romans, and there was another one, I don't remember it right now. So, the idea, the historical sense that Shakespeare got from this text was much more than other people while going through the historical text. So, what is it that makes you a poet? That receptivity. Eliot does not talk about it, but again, it's implied. What is to be insisted upon is the poet must develop or procure the consciousness of the past, and that he should not continue to develop this consciousness, and that he should continue to develop this consciousness throughout his career. So, consciousness, some could call it imagination, some could call it receptivity. Eliot calls it consciousness about the past and about tradition. What happens is a continual surrender of himself as he is at the moment to something which is more valuable. The progress of an artist is a continual self sacrifice, a continual extinction of personality. Now he comes to this part of personality. And he says it is a continual surrender of himself. Your personality, you efface your personality, you remove your personality. Now, a lot of people say that in order to become a poet or to become a writer, it's very important to have a strong sense of the self. And a lot of people say that writers are the ones that have the greatest egos. Poets and writers, they have great or huge egos. But Eliot says it's a continual surrender of himself. So, you know the difference between continuous and continual. Continual stops, then happens again, then stops, and then happens again. For example, it has rained continually. It rained in the morning, stopped in the afternoon, then rained in the evening, then rained in the night. There was a pause, etc. This is continual. Continuous is which doesn't stop even for a moment. So, continual surrender of himself. So, when you read, then you surrender. This is how it goes. Next paragraph, he says, there remains to define this process of depersonalization and its relation to the sense of tradition. It is in this depersonalization that art may be said to approach the condition of science. I therefore invite you to consider as a suggestive analogy the action which takes place when a bit of finely filiated platinum is introduced into a chamber containing oxygen and sulfur dioxide. Now he comes to this point of depersonalization. Again, question asked number of times. According to which critic poetry is an act of depersonalization? The answer is T.S. Eliot. And next he comes to this idea of a gas chamber. Okay, so there is a chamber in which there is finely filiated platinum or a platinum wire, shred of platinum, which is a catalyst, and the chamber contains oxygen and sulfur dioxide. This is, now we come to the second part. This is again a very important quote. Honest criticism and sensitive appreciation are directed not upon the poet but upon the poetry. So you're not talking about Wordsworth when you are talking about his poetry. You are talking about a particular poem. So this statement forms the backbone of textual criticism or new criticism, text-based criticism. You are removing the biographical approach. You are removing the intentional fallacy that the poet wants to say this, but you are looking at what the poem is. If we attend to the confused cries of the newspaper critics and the susurrus of popular repetition that follows, we will hear the names of poets in great numbers. If we seek not blue book knowledge but the enjoyment of poetry and ask for a poem, we shall seldom find it. I have tried to point out the importance of relation of a poem to other poems by other authors. Now, this relation of the poem to other poems, I have talked to you about this. What does it mean? Relation of a text to other text. This talks about a term, and that term is intertextuality. Relation of other poems to other by other authors, and suggested the conception of poetry as a living whole of all the poetry that has ever been written. So organicity of poetry, that's another term he gives here. The other aspect of this impersonal theory of poetry is the relation of the poem to its author. As I hinted by the analogy that the mind of the mature poet differs from the immature one, not precisely in any valuation of personality, not being necessarily more interesting or having more to say, but rather than by being a more finely perfected medium in which special or very varied feelings are at the liberty to enter into new combinations. So, as I told you earlier also, that Eliot gave this quote that I am a classicist in literature. So, since he was a classicist, he would talk about refinement. He would talk about poetry as art and not as feeling, impersonality, and these are the things that he is going to talk. That's very natural. And he's going to frown upon spontaneity, and that's why he says, mature poets write after 25 and immature poets write before 25. So classicism has got these features. Training and art, not the material of the art, but the form is important. The way it is said is more important to classicists. So it's very natural for him to write these things. The analogy was that of the catalyst. When the two gases previously mentioned are mixed in the presence of a filament of platinum, they form sulfurous acid. This combination takes place only if the platinum is present. So platinum is the catalyst. Sulfurous acid would be H2SO3, if I'm not wrong. Nevertheless, the newly formed acid contains no trace of platinum, and the platinum itself is apparently unaffected, has remained inert, neutral, and unchanged. Now look at this statement. The mind of the poet is the shred of platinum. So mind of the poet is the shred of platinum. Platinum is the catalyst. Mind of the poet is a place where this chemical reaction has taken place. It may partly or exclusively operate upon the experience of the man himself, but the more perfect the artist, the more completely separate in him will be the man who suffers and the mind that creates. This is again an important line. The more completely separate in him will be the man who suffers and the mind which creates. So you are objective. Somebody has undergone a tragedy. When he writes about it, he becomes very impersonal. He doesn't take sides. Normally, when you see people write about events of their life, they become very partial. They try to portray themselves as saints. There is one person whose biography I found to be very blunt, and his autobiography, and that is Mahatma Gandhi's autobiography. He's written those things even which shouldn't have been written. The kind of lustful thoughts that he got when he used to press his father's feet about his wife, etc. These are the things one shouldn't know, but he has not hidden anything. He's become very, very objective about himself. So this kind of writing the autobiography is similar to what Eliot implies, that when you have suffered something, when you undergo something, not only suffered, but when you have enjoyed something, and when you write about that pleasurable experience, if you are mature, there is a difference between the person who has enjoyed that thing or suffered that thing, and between the mind that is writing that or writing about that experience. The more perfectly will the mind digest and transmute the passions which are its material. The experience, you will notice the elements which enter the presence of the transforming catalyst are of two kinds: emotions and feelings. So the two elements of poetry that he talks about are emotions and feelings. The effect of a work of art upon the person who enjoys it is an experience different in kind from any experience not of art. It may be formed out of one emotion or maybe a combination of several and various feelings. Inhering for the writer in particular words or phrases or images may be added to compose the final result. A great poetry may be made without the direct use of any emotion whatever, composed out of feeling solely. Canto 15th of the Inferno, Brunetto Lecchini, is a working up of the emotion evident in the situation, but the effect, though single as that of any work of art, is obtained by considerable complexity of detail. The last quatrain gives an image, a feeling attaching to an image, which came, which did not develop simply out of what precedes, but which was probably an suspension, which was probably in suspension in the poet's mind until the proper combination arrived for it to add itself to. The poet's mind is in fact a receptacle for seizing and storing up numberless feelings, phrases, images which remain there until all the parts which can unite to form a new compound are present together. I'll try to draw this and post it in the next video.